Welcome to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Kentucky attorney Jeff Roberts has over 25 years of experience. He'll provide answers to your questions related to personal injury and automobile accidents, workers' compensation claims, and Social Security disability benefits. Let's join Jeff for this episode. Jeff, here we go with episode 7. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. Today, we're going to take a little bit more of a departure. Last week, actually, or the last episode, episode 6, we had Sheriff Steger on, and we talked a lot about some of the accidents and the issues that happen on the Calloway County roadways. And one of the things he did talk about were tractor-trailer accidents and some of the reasons those happen. There'll be a link in the show notes, actually, to episode 6. If not, you can always go back to jeffrobertslaw.com and check out the podcast page, and you'll see episode 6 there. But Jeff, why don't we spend today talking about trucking accidents and things that happen and the reasons those happen, and your experience, obviously, handling those kind of cases. Those are pretty devastating, typically.
They are very devastating as a general rule because the semi-trucks, obviously, are so much heavier, so much bigger than the passenger vehicle whenever there is a collision between a semi-truck and a passenger vehicle or a semi-truck and another semi-truck. The force involved there tends to result in much more significant injuries than you would see for the same type of impact for smaller vehicles.
Well, and I know in the previous episode, again, the sheriff did talk about the need to wear your seatbelts because, again, if you're traveling in a car at 60, 70 miles an hour, your body is also traveling at 60, 70 miles an hour until it's stopped by another object. And in a catastrophic collision like this, obviously that's going to cause some damage.
Yes, exactly. And the seatbelt in the vehicle is there for your safety, and that's one thing you can do to protect yourself. You know, nobody plans on being in a motor vehicle collision, but we buy insurance on our cars to protect us in case we are in a motor vehicle collision. Put the seatbelt on yourself and make sure everybody else in your vehicle is in the seatbelt. And if you have a child, that they're in the proper child restraint for them to protect yourself and your family.
Well, Jeff, one of the things that I know I see, and I drive the Kentucky roadways a lot, is the improper use of a seatbelt. I mean, a lot of people really don't like that strap that comes across your chest, so maybe they kind of slip it back behind their shoulder, so they really just have a lap belt. There's a reason, especially in the front seat, you shouldn't do that.
Exactly, and the seatbelts are designed to provide for your safety while you're inside the vehicle, to keep you from hitting the steering wheel or going so far that your head, if you're in the passenger seat, hits the dash, or you slide forward and hit your knees, in things of that nature. And if you take the shoulder strap off or put it underneath the arm instead of having it where it is supposed to be located, then that seatbelt is nowhere near as effective, and you will be allowed to go much further forward than you would have if you'd have been properly wearing the seatbelt.
Well, now you're looking at injuries to the chest. You're looking for serious head injuries at that point, which could lead to brain trauma and all these other issues that you've dealt with over the years.
Correct, and that's I mean, your injuries can increase drastically. The severity of the injuries can increase drastically if you're wearing the seatbelt improperly, and also if you have your child seat installed improperly. You need to make sure that you have child seats installed the proper way.
Right. There are all sorts of guidelines. I mean, you can go to YouTube even and find those. I mean, they're all out there. But I'm amazed at how many people. I mean, I've got 2 kids, and when we were young parents, I mean, obviously, you think you're doing it right, but a lot of people don't. And it's nice to have another pair of eyes on the situation, or at least go watch some videos to make sure, should it be facing forward or backward, or do they need a booster, and when do I transition from this to that? And these rules are out there for safety, and it's a tragedy anytime a traffic accident occurs, especially when there's an injury or unfortunately a fatality.
Right.
And those happen a lot as well.
Right. And just because you talked about the YouTube videos, I know a lot of police departments will inspect. You can drive up to the police departments and they will inspect to make sure you have the child seat installed properly. I know when I first became a father, I had no experience with the child seat and how to put a child seat in, and so having someone who knows exactly how it is and they can look at it and say, yes, you've got it done correctly, or you need to do it this way, can be very invaluable.
Right. Well, let's jump into the trucking accident situation. You know, one of the things that happen a lot is I think people are surprised at how quickly they come up on a tractor trailer when it's on the road. I mean, if you're traveling and maybe there's a slight incline, I mean, obviously it seems like common sense, but sometimes we forget the large truck like that, because of the sheer weight, is going to end up slowing down. It's just the inertia, and you can really come up on these trucks a lot quicker than you might imagine.
Exactly. Even on interstate roads, when they're going up hills, they will lose speed going up the hills a lot of times, so you will approach them much quicker than you would a normal passenger car, because their speed is slowed down some from that standpoint. In Calloway County, where my office is located in Murray, we see semis on the county roadways, off of the interstate setting, and a semi cannot take a curve in a roadway the same as a car, so they have to go slower in those settings as well. If you've got a real sharp curve, they're going to be slowing down, and you can come up on a semi much quicker in that setting than you would a normal vehicle.
Well, and I think it's just it's the physics of it, right? I mean, they don't want to tump that trailer over, and there's a lot of weight in there, and those things are usually packed to the gills anyway. So, I mean, it's going to be a lot different. And those drivers, obviously, they've taken advanced safety training. They have a commercial driver's license most of the time. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's the drivers are all supposed to have, if they're driving a semi-tractor trailer, should have a CDL license and have gone through proper training. But that's one thing. Whenever someone is injured in a collision with a tractor trailer, one of the things that you want to look at is, was this driver properly trained? Did this driver have a safe driving record in the past, or had this driver had multiple other collisions, maybe been terminated from one trucking company and then hired by another trucking company, but he was terminated because he was not a safe driver. And those are factors that you need to look into, your attorney needs to look into, for you to properly represent you in these type of cases.
Right. I mean, just because they've been in an accident and they show up at a different company, that company has the responsibility to do some due diligence on that driver, correct?
Whenever they hire a driver and put a driver out on the roadway, they have a responsibility to all the other drivers on the roadway to make sure that they're putting a driver that is properly trained and is a safe driver out in that vehicle.
Right. And so that means, again, the company now has a financial interest in making sure that driver is legitimate and properly trained. If you and I are out on 641 and I happen to run into you, that's two people, and you're going to look at my insurance, and hopefully, you're going to do whatever you need to do to make sure you're taken care of, your family members are taken care of. But when a trucker is involved in an accident, there's multiple parties that can be actually brought into that case, right? So, I mean, from an insurance standpoint, really, I mean, it's much more complex than just two guys out on the road. It's
certainly more complex than just two individuals in their own personal vehicles who have a collision out on the roadway. Because the collision could be caused by so many different factors. The driver not being properly trained on how to drive that vehicle is just one of the factors. It could be a improper maintenance of the vehicle. The brakes may be out of alignment or something of that nature.
The wheels may be bald or in an unsafe condition.
Tires blow out. I've handled cases where it wasn't a semi-tractor trailer, it was a dump truck, but it had a bad tire on it that should have been replaced, and it blew up, and then the dump truck went across the interstate and hit a couple of other cars there, and so those things can come into play. The loading of the vehicle, if a semi is loaded in properly and it allows the load to shift during a turn or a curve or something, that can cause the vehicle to the driver to lose control and a collision occur from that standpoint. So there's more variables at play in a semi-truck accident, and there's more regulations and laws in play with a semi-truck as well, because you have the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Act that is designed to regulate how these vehicles, which are such enormous vehicles that can cause so much damage if they are in a collision, to make sure they are safely operated. So, they've got what safety mechanisms are supposed to be on those, how long a driver can drive the vehicle, how long they can be on shift, so to speak. Even if they're not driving, there's a certain amount of time that they're allowed to drive in a day or be on shift in a day's time.
And that's kind of where those driver logs kind of come into play. Those things are always kept accurately and honestly, though, right?
Well, we hope they are, but and I do think that it's getting better. There's some more electronic record keeping, and the trucks have some electronic things on them now to help keep better track of that. Back when they were paper logs, the records, the driver logs were frequently not as up to date, and they weren't kept accurately. And the driver log may show they were in Nashville when they've already reached St. Louis.
Right.
But hopefully that is getting better with some of the more regulations.
Yeah, I would hope so. Let me come back to this collision with a tractor trailer. I mean, obviously, as a plaintiff's attorney, you're going to represent the injured victim. So if I were driving down the road and suddenly was in a collision with a large, carrier, obviously the driver's potentially at fault. So there could be a claim against the driver. There could be a claim against the trucking company for a number of different reasons. But if the driver went to a depot and picked up a trailer that was loaded by another company, okay, we're gonna go ahead and load out, and then you're going to show up and you're going to take that trailer from point A to point B. It could also be that company that actually loaded the trailer, correct? And I mean, there are a number of other ways that compensation could be found or at least potentially investigated in terms of providing enough insurance to not only pay for the property damage, but also the medical bills, which are going to be extensive.
Exactly, yes. And we would look at least an attorney should look at all of those different avenues from there once they determine what caused the accident, who caused the accident. And I've been doing this type of work for over 27 years now, and I don't want it to be. It sounds like I'm saying that the truck driver are always at fault. There's times that the truck driver didn't do anything wrong in a semi-collision. There's times when they did do something wrong. And so, if I'm representing an injured party, my first thing to do is to determine how did this collision occur? How are the proper experts to determine exactly how this collision occurred and who was at fault in causing that collision? And then that leads us to where we need to go on pursuing the claim.
So you're going to hire somebody commonly known as an accident reconstruction specialist. I mean, is that kind of how that happens when there's a collision like this? Yes,
I would hire an accident reconstructionist who has experience in reconstructing semi-collisions. There are some accident reconstructionists out there that don't have the training and experience, at least in my opinion, to properly do a reconstruction of a semi-truck accident. And then I would want to have either that accident reconstructionist or someone else, another accident reconstructionist, that would download the quote-unquote black box data, the event data recorders for all the vehicles involved in the collision, that would give us a lot of other information, and have a expert mechanic that's familiar with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Standards go over the semi to make sure, to check and see if it did violate any of those standards.
That sounds a lot more extensive than just relying on the police report that's going to be filled out, I guess, by the state trooper or the sheriff or whomever first responder is there at the site of the accident. But why is that so different?
Well, it's different because you've got a lot more laws in play from that standpoint, and the deputy or the police officer that goes out to a collision and deals with the initial effects of the collision, make sure everybody, all the other motorists on the highway are avoiding the area. Anybody injured is getting proper medical treatment and getting to the hospital that they need to be. when they get on the scene, their goal is first off to protect everybody there and make sure anybody injured is getting proper treatment. And then, a lot of times if it's a very serious injury, the police may have their own accident reconstructionist come out and do an accident reconstruction of the collision as well, and that can even happen in car wreck. If it's just two passenger cars, I've had that occur. If you had a death or a very, very serious injury, then they will have a reconstructionist from the police department do a reconstruction in that setting. But having someone who is more familiar with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Standards and more familiar with semis I think is beneficial, and certainly that's going to be someone that I can work with. Police officers would certainly talk with me about things, and I'd be able to get their report, but having them help educate me on how to best represent my client, you wouldn't have that with the police officer accident reconstructionist.
In some of these, this is going to involve getting out there very quickly and gathering up evidence. Skid marks, obviously skid marks and debris, sometimes debris is removed from the accident scene. Skid marks can fade over time, things like that, but those could be valuable pieces of information in a case like this.
Can be critical. Yes, absolutely. They can be critical, especially if you have a tire blowout. Getting out there and making and documenting that there was nothing that they hit on the roadway that caused that tire to blow, that it was because the tire wasn't properly maintained and should have been removed from the vehicle and a new tire put on it. In various other, the gouge marks in the roadway will let you know where the vehicles were at the time of the collision. And skid marks and things will help to document any evasive maneuvers any of the drivers have made or attempted to make from that. And that all goes into determining exactly who was at fault. And it does fade over time, and you will lose that evidence over a period of time. That's the reason getting a reconstructionist out as soon as possible to document everything is very important in these cases.
I would think that the insurance company for the trucking company, the people that are representing the trucking company, are going to have teams of people on call for that. It's incumbent upon your client to contact you quickly, or someone who's been in an accident to get with an attorney quickly, because the other team's already mobilized, I would think.
Yeah, most trucking companies and their insurance carriers, at least in my understanding, have a rapid response team. If it's if a semi rolls back and bumps a car on the roadway, probably not going to send a rapid response team to that. But if there is a very serious injury, they're going to have their rapid response team get out there. In that response team is there to try to document it, but they're documenting anything that's favorable to the person paying them. And I personally want somebody out there that's going to be documenting everything that is out there and not ignoring things that are favorable, that show the wreck was the truck driver's fault.
Right. And so a lot of those two reports are going to overlap, but there's going to be some variations there, again, because you're looking at it through a different lens. And that's probably that line of conversation you want to have, whether that's through discovery, with the other drivers, or whether that's through in a court scenario. If this actually were to go to trial, you'd want to find out the answers to those discrepancies. Well, how come this report shows that and the other report shows something different?
Right. And of course, you and I know what discovery is. Some people listening may not understand what that term is, but that's the legal term we use for when the parties pre-trial, after suit is filed, but before trial, exchange information, talk to witnesses, take depositions, sworn statements of the witnesses, and things of that nature to move the case forward, and so everybody understands what all the evidence is in that, and that is part of the process that you have to go through, and you need to make sure you're doing that. And the other aspect in these cases is evidence can be destroyed and
accidentally lost on purpose. And so contacting an attorney who is familiar with handling these claims allows that attorney to send out what we refer to as a preservation letter. And when we send that letter out to the trucking company,
and the others involved in that to tell them to keep the driver's logs. We want you maintain the driver's logs. Don't destroy any driver's logs. Don't destroy any shipping manifest or anything of that nature. And you don't destroy the truck and keep the truck in the condition it is, and preserve all of that evidence so our expert witness can look through that evidence.
It's almost like forensic evidence in a crime case. I mean, you still want your team to be able to get in there and examine all this stuff. And I would think if the truck's totaled out, obviously, they may say, well, we just scrapped it. And you lose a lot of information when that happens.
Yes, you lose, and you can end up losing your case because that happens. Once I send the letter out, or the attorney sends a letter out and they receive it, if they destroy the evidence or the evidence is lost, in Kentucky, you get a jury instruction that the jury can, in fact, infer that evidence would have been favorable to my client in that setting, which can be very, when you don't know what the evidence is because it's destroyed, having the jury instructed, you can infer that it would have hurt the defendant and helped the plaintiff or the injured party, can make the difference. So, and obviously the best thing to do is what we want is them to keep the evidence so we know exactly what did occur from there. But if you wait a couple of months before you seek legal counsel, as long as if they get rid of it before they receive that letter, then we don't get that jury instruction in Kentucky.
And so in a case like this, you have, I would think, part of the decision would be to compensate the person for the loss of their property, for their medical bills, things like that. Do punitive aspects also come into play? Is this where if they were to violate that preservation notice, I mean, do you get both of those in this kind of a case?
Violating the preservation letter, I don't think would impose punitive damages under Kentucky law. I've never seen a court say that would lead to punitive damages. In fact, it's not even a separate cause of action. Some states actually you have a cause of action for spoliation of evidence is the legal term for it, and but Kentucky does not do that. We just have the jury instruction from that standpoint. But punitive damages can certainly come into play in these type of collisions. If you had a driver that is impaired, that is out on the roadway, that can be subject him and the company to punitive damages. If you have a driver that is over their limits and routinely go over their driver time limits, and that's a factor in causing this collision, that could be subject to punitive damages there if they let somebody drive who did not have a CDL and therefore should never have been in this vehicle to start with on the roadway. So there's a lot of things that can lead to punitive damage, may or may not. It depends on each individual situation.
But it could be a factor.
It could be a factor. In punitive damages, compensatory damages are designed to compensate someone for what they've lost. That's their medical bills, their lost wages, their pain and suffering. Punitive damages are designed to punish wrongful conduct, malicious type conduct, or extreme gross negligence type conduct. And so it's designed to punish the defendant more so than to compensate the injured party for what they lost.
And this isn't just the driver. This could also be the trucking company itself, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So some of the big issues, and you just really kind of jumped into that, which is a great segue here. Obviously, if a driver is distracted, I think as we were preparing for this, I mean that's a big issue. This could be the driver talking on a cell phone, just like a normal driver, just like a teenage driver, texting or talking. I mean that's a distracted issue. Can you talk through some other issues related to distracted driving that you might see in a trucking case?
Yeah, you see that with them being on the phone is something you see frequently. A lot of, and I've not personally dealt with this in a trucking case, but I know that it's occurred because I know of the cases it's occurred where they had a laptop in their vehicle and they were on the laptop, or they were playing a movie on there and paying attention to the movie instead of paying attention to the roadway. And so there's a lot of things that can be come into play from that if they're using especially if they're using any sort of a laptop that may be sitting over, reaching over to try to adjust something on that, all can lead to distraction on behalf of the semi driver.
Even just adjusting the radio. I mean, things like that always they can happen. They happen in normal accidents, and just the damages could be much more severe.
Exactly.
If it were a driver.
Yeah, with a semi, especially like as we said earlier, those don't stop on a dime in the force that they deliver when there is an impact. Going at 50 mile an hour, the force they're delivering is greater than the force of a pickup truck.
Well, on that point, they don't correct an error as quickly either. I mean, in a car, you can whip around and maybe avoid something, but a tractor trailer is not going to move that quickly.
No, and that's where I said earlier that not every wreck is the semi driver's fault.
Right.
When we're driving passenger vehicles, it is our responsibility to make sure that we are driving safely around these semis. And if you're zigzagging through traffic and you zigzag in front of a semi, that semi is not going to be able to react the same as a passenger vehicle is going to be able to react in there as far as turning. They have a wider turn radius, and it's on the back of most vehicles, semis that I see on that wider turn radius, and you see them starting a turn to the right, and you run up beside them, you could be caught underneath that vehicle, and that's probably as much your fault, if not more your fault, than it is the driver of the semi, especially if they've already started that turn before you drive up there. I think it's going to be your fault at that point. So, we need to, and we got to understand that they can't stop on the dime. So if we pull over in front of them coming up to a stoplight, and we pull over real quickly and we stop quickly, that semi is not going to be able to stop as quickly as we are. And so we've got to, when we merge back in front of them, we need to make sure we're giving plenty of room before we get back in front of that vehicle.
Well, and that goes with it. I've seen this on the highways here, is you see a driver who pops out and maybe they want to zip over in front of the tractor trailer, and the cars in front of them suddenly slow down.
Right.
Well, you just decreased that space, that buffer zone that the tractor trailer was probably properly maintaining, but you just cut that in half.
Exactly.
And that's unfortunate, but I mean, these things we see it on the roads all the time.
Yeah, and I drive on interstates a lot, and there's a lot of times that we'll be driving at normal highway speed, and for some reason we slow down to 45 mile an hour, and I never figure out when it finally breaks up, and you never see what caused it to. And it could be just somebody rubbernecking.
Yep.
Somebody pulled off on the shoulder of the road, and it causes everybody behind them to slow down. And if you pull in front of a semi, and you only got a very small distance between you and that semi, when you do that, and then the cars in front of you quickly brake, it can result in a collision.
Well, one of the things you talked about earlier in this episode was a driver who might exceed the drive time. Can you kind of give us some framework around that? What do you mean by exceeding their drive time?
The federal laws require that drivers only drive a certain amount of time in a given 24-hour period of time. So they have to, if a driver exceeds that, then fatigue comes in.
Yeah.
I mean, and any of us who's ever driven somewhere on vacation, and a lot of people in Calloway County have driven to Florida for vacation, and if you try to drive that all by yourself, by the end of that trip, you're going to be extremely fatigued at that point, and best to switch out and let other people drive in that setting. But and they saw that with truck drivers, and they don't want truck drivers driving 16, 17 hours a day, because that's going to increase the number of collisions on the roadway. So they have a set number of hours that they are allowed to drive that vehicle, and then they have to have a rest period in between. I think I said 24, but they have to have a rest period in between.
Right.
So.
And again, that's because your reaction time decreases, all these other factors, just like being tired, like you said, on a long road trip. I mean, it happens.
Yes.
Now put a huge tractor trailer, involved, and it just gets worse and worse and worse.
Yes.
You talked a little bit about defective equipment, and that could be brakes that don't work or that fail due to improper maintenance. Let's talk a little bit about some of the defective issues that come into play, I guess, from a trailer standpoint in these kind of accidents? You've got brakes, obviously.
Yeah, brakes out of proper adjustment is I've seen that as a factor in several collisions. There, that is one. You see others who, if they don't, the semi should have underride.
Those Mansfield bars that you blogged about a while back. Yeah,
exactly, to keep you from someone from going up underneath the vehicle, and those, and then there's other requirements. They have to have certain markings on them, in the driver training and the driver time frame is other factors that come in under the Motor Carrier Safety Act. That's not as much of an equipment issue there, but the biggest one, of course, tires have to be in proper, have to have proper tread on them, and in fact, the drivers are supposed to inspect their vehicles before they get on the roadway.
It's just like a pilot. You got to do a walk around.
Yes, exactly. And there's a checklist that they go through on the walk around. Make sure all the blinkers and all of that are working. Make sure the brakes are properly adjusted. And there's just a variety of factors that they have to go through or supposed to go through before they get on the roadway.
And that's to keep not only them protected, but to keep us safe as people sharing the road with these large trucks.
Absolutely.
Now, one of the things that comes into play is, and I think you actually did talk about it, was a load that may shift or something that may fall off. Can you talk a little bit about how that happens in a trucking case, or could happen?
Yeah, my experience with it has been more in the line of, and to be honest with you, most of my load shifts have been from my workers' comp practice, as opposed to it causing an accident. The load shifts causes the semi to overturn and the driver get injured, and then I represent the driver for that injury in a workers' compensation claim. They do occur where they overturn onto a vehicle as well. I just haven't been involved in any of those cases at this point. But if the load is not put on the trailer properly, most of the times I've seen it in like what I refer to as cloverleaf intersections on or access roads to interstates, where when you get off, you make that real sharp curve to get off the interstate or to get onto the interstate the same way. And if you look at it from above, it looks like a four-leaf clover. And they're going away from those type of interchanges, but making that real sharp curve, there's a lot of force on the vehicle at that point, and I'm not an engineer or a scientist, I'm a lawyer, but that force, and then that can cause the vehicle to roll over. And obviously if you're on the other side of it when it rolls over, it can cause serious injury.
Right. Well, I know coming down here today, even I was on 24 coming down, and I took that Fulton exit. And so that now is a whole different exit. When I went to Murray State, you had the cloverleaf where you kind of had to come back around and come up under the expressway, the interstate there. Now it's more of a left exit where it's nice. It's a sweeping turn, which has got to be a lot easier on not only regular drivers but also on these tractor trailer loads.
Yeah, obviously it is. Yeah, it is.
And that's kind of what you were getting at.
Exactly, yeah. And that change come about because of when Interstate 69 come through. They wanted to get rid of those clover leaves for that intersection. So that clover leaf where I-24 and what was the Purchase Parkway, now I-69, meet, they changed that. The same thing at because I practiced all over Western Kentucky, and they had the exact same thing at the Hopkinsville-Madisonville exit on the West Kentucky Parkway, and they've gotten rid of that there. In fact, I mentioned before that I go to Louisville because my daughter lives in Louisville, and when I go up there where West Kentucky Parkway meets 65, you have to have that
just outside of E-Town,
exactly at Elizabethtown. You've got that clover leaf, and if in coming back home, the Watterson Expressway onto 65. To get back onto 65, you've got that same type of real sharp curve to get back on to the interstate, or to transfer to the other interstate.
And a lot of times, if the trailer itself doesn't tump over, a strap could break and an item could actually shift and maybe roll off or fall off of the trailer, and that could cause a problem. How is that handled? Is that the fault of the trucking company? Is that the fault of the driver? I mean, what happens? I mean, 'cause if I've got a big piece of machinery bouncing down the interstate, and unfortunately I collide with it.
It can be the fault of the potentially the driver. If the driver is responsible for strapping down the load, like on a flatbed truck, and they're the responsible ones for strapping that load down, and they do that improperly, then obviously that's going to be the driver's fault. If the person, if they just pick up the load that's already on the flatbed, already strapped down, then the company that loaded the truck are going to be the ones that are more responsible for that. I think the driver's still got the obligation to look and make sure everything's safe before they get back out on the roadway there. And then you see some loads that, frankly, they should probably have more straps on them than what they do have, and so you can get back into the trucking company itself be at fault for not providing the proper tie downs that are needed for the load that's being moved.
Right, that could be a scary time, for everybody involved.
Yes.
And that's where, when you're talking about the proper following distance and things like that, it gives you that extra second or two of reaction time that may save a life.
Exactly, and it may be your life you're saving.
Well, exactly. And I guess let's wrap up with this. We talked about punitive situations as well. DUIs do come into play with over-the-road drivers, with commercial drivers, these CDL licenses, and that's not just alcohol. That could also be drugs. That could also be a lot of things. How is that approached, and does that have an impact on the case? Probably in the mind of the jury, but I mean, can they take that into account in terms of their award?
Yes, if the driver was impaired at the time by alcohol, amphetamine, something else, I've seen throughout my career, especially a substance that would keeps the driver awake, like amphetamine, and keeps them because they think they can drive more hours that way, and I've seen that frequently, and that certainly can come into play. If they were impaired at the time of the collision, that is evidence that we would gather and make sure that we presented to the jury, because that could impose the punitive damages that we talked about earlier, in addition to the compensatory damages, and it makes certainly comes into play on who was at fault in causing this collision. Reaction times vary depending on what you're on from that. So it's just, it's certainly relevant in the driver, if they're especially serious collisions. The driver is supposed to always be drug tested after the collision.
And that again, in terms of gathering that evidence, that's a valuable piece of evidence at that point.
Yes,
that you want to make sure that one doesn't get lost, but two is also administered properly.
Correct. That it's administered properly. Unfortunately, what I see a lot of time is it's a urine drug test. And there can be some admissibility issues with just a urine drug test, because that's showing what's through the system. Blood test is by far the best way for the investigators to go. I can't force somebody, even if I could. It's going to be best case scenario a couple of days after the collision before I get involved in the case anyway. So it's too late. But the officers in DOT should, in my opinion, should always be doing blood tests on the drivers, because that tells you what is in their system actively at the time of the collision.
Well, Jeff, if someone is in a collision or their family member's in a collision, I think you just hit upon it. They really need to get in touch with an attorney. They need to call you or someone else very quickly. And what would you say on that topic, I guess? Yeah,
if there's a collision, especially with a semi, it's much more important with a semi collision or the more serious injury case, even between two passenger cars, because you want to preserve all of that evidence. And we know the insurance company is going to do that from the at-fault driver. They're going to get out there. They're going to preserve the evidence that helps them. They're going to take the photographs that are going to be helpful to them, and hopefully they'll take the photographs of all the evidence. But once that evidence goes away, then you're not going to get it back. It's gone forever from that standpoint. And with a semi-collision, making sure you have that evidence preserved, or a serious motor vehicle collision, making sure you have that evidence preserved can make the difference on whether you do get punitive damages or don't get punitive damages in the case, or whether you're successful in the case or not. So, obviously, the first thing to do is to make sure the family member is getting the medical attention they need. And unless you're a doctor, you're not going to be able to provide that for your own family member, and shouldn't even then. But once the loved one is being taken care of from a medical standpoint, and that, getting in touch with an attorney is generally a phone call. You can call the attorney's office up, and I meet clients in those settings. I meet them at the hospital if need be, to talk. And some families want me to come to the hospital. Some say, no, we don't want to do it at the hospital. We want to do it somewhere else. And that's fine. I meet clients at their homes, in my office, restaurants, and things of that nature. But getting the attorney involved sooner rather than later to make sure all the evidence is preserved, it can be the ultimate deciding factor on the success of that case.
Well, Jeff, let me bring this back up. It's been a long time since we've actually spoken about this, but what does it cost to hire you? Because I think that's a reason some people, they may want to think about it. They may be nervous about getting an attorney engaged, especially in an accident. Right. Let's talk through that a little bit.
Well, I work on a contingency fee basis, and what that means, what that means is my fee is contingent upon the recovery. So when you come in to see me at the start of the case, you don't pay me a penny. There's no charge for my services on a car wreck or truck accident type case until the end, when the claim is over with. When I put money in your pocket, that's when I get paid my attorney fee. And I charge a percentage of the recovery is what the attorney fee is. So my fee is directly tied to how well I do for my client. Which gives me the incentive to do a really good job for my clients, because I do better financially the better job I do for my clients there. And also I am an attorney who advances the litigation expenses. There are some attorneys who do that, and there are attorneys who do not do that. But when you talk about hiring an accident reconstructionist and downloading event data recorders and having a mechanic go look at the vehicle, you're looking at thousands and thousands of dollars piling up very, very quickly. And I advance that cost. That cost is contingent upon recovery as well. So, if I get involved early on in the process, I look at it and I don't think the truck driver was at fault in the accident, and I don't think there's a claim against them, and maybe the person who contacted me was the one who was at fault in the accident, they're not out anything for me to investigate that claim. That I eat all of that cost. Now, if I am successful in the case, like my attorney fee, I get reimbursed at that point in time. I get my
And that's why the Kentucky Bar Association, who governs kind of the attorneys in the Supreme Court, they tend to say, look, you've also got to say that the court costs and expenses are also the responsibility of the client. So within your fee, there's also going to be, we had this cost for the expert. But again, all of that's handled at the back end, and that basically assumes that you were successful in representing them, right?
Correct, yes. And it's all handled when I put the money in my client's hands. That's when I get paid my attorney fee, when I get reimbursed my expenses. Right.
Okay, Jeff, I really want to thank you for your time. These accidents are they're tragic. Some of them, again, result in fatalities, and we have wrongful death information on the website. We have videos and things. We've talked about that. And in fact, I'm going to put links. If you're listening to this podcast, you can always come back to the website, jeffrobertslaw.com. And it's actually going to have some really good videos out there, and I'll have links to all of this information to where you can see Jeff talk about some of these other topics that we've kind of raised in this particular episode. But Jeff, you've done this for a long time. You know what you're doing, obviously. And as a point that you said earlier, you don't just stay here in Calloway County. I mean, you handle cases all across Western Kentucky and beyond.
Correct. Yeah, I handle motor vehicle and workers' comp and Social Security cases, even for that matter, all across Western Kentucky and beyond. I've handled cases out of Northern Kentucky. I've handled actually some cases out of Eastern Kentucky and Louisville area fairly frequently, that I handle cases outside of what I call Western Kentucky. Some people in Kentucky disagree on where Western Kentucky starts and ends, but what I can refer to as Western Kentucky, I handle cases outside of that area. And like I said earlier, I've been doing this for more than 27 years. And when you work on a contingency fee basis, if you aren't successful for your clients, you're not going to be in business for 27 years.
Absolutely. Well, my friend, again, I want to thank you for your time. I hope this information was helpful to the listeners. And for more information, by all means, please check out the website, and we'll take it from there. And we'll talk to you again in about 2 weeks.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Jeff will return in 2 weeks. Until then, he invites you to visit jeffrobertslaw.com and follow his firm on Facebook. At the Roberts Law Office, you'll find a history of small town service and big city results.